Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring some fascinating concepts from the Minds in Motion framework directed by Dr. Shirafan. And, if you enjoy this kind of in-depth analysis, definitely make sure to follow the channel for more.
Absolutely. This framework is it's such a brilliant lens for what we're going to unpack today.
It really is. So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are the CEO of a globally recognized brand, like a massive multi-billion-dollar operation.
Right. One of those legacy companies everyone knows.
Exactly. You wake up, you check the numbers, and everything looks fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no accounting scandal brewing. Your stock isn't collapsing. There is absolutely no burning platform that's demanding emergency action.
Which is usually the dream, right?
Yeah. You've actually spent years carefully reshaping the entire organization, and the data shows it's working. But then your phone rings.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. On the other end is a billionaire activist investor. And he informs you that he's just taken a $1.3 billion stake in your company.
It's a casual $1 billion.
No, just a casual billion.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a suggestion. He has a demand. He wants you to take this company you've painstakingly built and violently break it in two.
It's the ultimate corporate nightmare. Just a casual morning phone call threatening to completely upend your life's work. And not because you failed, but because someone else looked at a spreadsheet and decided they could squeeze out a slightly higher margin if you tore your own house down.
Right. And this isn't some hypothetical business school scenario. This actually happened in 2013 to Indra Nooyi, who was the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo.
And her response was incredible.
Yeah, she said no. And she didn't just say no once and hang up. She stood her ground repeatedly over years, engaging in this brutal public standoff while running one of the largest food and beverage companies on earth.
Which brings us back to the Minds in Motion framework we mentioned. It's normally used to analyze systemic change from a deeply scientific perspective. It looks at this concept called temporal dissonance.
Temporal dissonance.
Yeah.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's basically a fancy way of describing what happens when a system's internal timeline completely mismatches with its environment's timeline. So think of a climate scientist trying to model a 50-year shift in ocean temperatures, right?
Sure.
But their university funding is entirely dependent on them publishing some flashy, attention-grabbing paper every 6 months. The framework analyzes how leaders survive that exact tension.
Oh, wow. So we're taking that scientific framework and applying it directly to the boardroom today, because this isn't just a history lesson about PepsiCo. It's a masterclass in how you defend a long game.
A hypothesis that's going to take a decade to prove.
Exactly. Defending that when every single person around you is screaming at you to play by the short clock. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the gravity of that billion-dollar phone call in 2013, we have to go back to the beginning of her tenure.
Right. We have to rewind to 2006. That's when Indra Nooyi is officially named CEO of PepsiCo. And her appointment is historic on multiple fronts. She becomes the first woman of color and the first immigrant to lead a Fortune 50 company.
And she is inheriting an absolute juggernaut at this point.
Right. Massive. The company is highly profitable. Their market share is strong. The dividends are just flowing.
Which honestly sounds like the easiest job in the world. You walk in, you don't touch anything, and you just take the credit for the momentum. It's that classic, if it ain't broke, don't fix it setup.
Paradoxically, though, that is actually one of the most dangerous times to take the helm if you are a visionary leader.
Really? Why is that?
Because a crisis gives a leader capital to make radical changes. Peace and profitability, on the other hand, breed institutional complacency.
Ah, I see. But Nooyi wasn't looking at the current quarter's earnings, which I imagine were heavily dependent on people buying like 20-ounce bottles of Mountain Dew and family-sized bags of Doritos.
Right. That was their bread and butter.
But she was looking 10 to 15 years down the road. According to the notes from Dr. Sharifin's team, she identified 3 massive converging macro shifts that PepsiCo absolutely had to get ahead of.
And those were pretty radical for the time.
Very. First, rising consumer demand for healthier products. People were getting more conscious about sugar. Second, mounting global pressure on resources, specifically fresh water and carbon emissions.
And the third one was a talent shift.
Right. A fundamental shift in the talent market. The best recruits were increasingly choosing where to work based on corporate values, not just salary.
We really need to pause and put ourselves in the mindset of 2006 here, because this was pre-financial crisis. This was long before ubiquitous wellness influencers or oat milk lattes or carbon-neutral pledges.
Right, being green wasn't trendy yet.
Exactly. So for a legacy company whose entire cultural identity was synonymous with carbonated sugar water and salty snacks to suddenly pivot toward health and environmental sustainability, I mean, that was a deeply radical proposition.
But surely board members aren't stupid, right? They read the Wall Street Journal. They have access to the same demographic reports Nooyi did. If the data clearly shows the market is shifting toward health, why wouldn't a board of directors want to get ahead of it?
Because of the incentive structures built into corporate psychology and Wall Street mechanics in general.
How so?
Their entire operating model is built on predictable, incremental growth over a 90-day window. If a CEO comes to a board reacting to a burning platform, say a massive food safety scandal or a crippling sugar tax, the board will authorize expensive changes because they have to.
They're putting out a fire.
Exactly. The survival of the organism is threatened. That's a forced transformation. But Nooyi is pitching a visionary transformation.
Right. Isn't this kind of like demanding your family completely rebuild the foundation of your house while the sun is shining and the roof isn't leaking?
That's a great way to put it. She's walking into a perfectly healthy patient's room and saying, hey, your blood work looks great today, but if we don't perform open heart surgery right now, you'll have a fatal heart attack in 15 years.
And the immune system of a large corporation will fiercely reject unnecessary surgery. Because how do you convince people to spend the money and endure the chaos for a storm they can't even see yet?
You're proposing spending massive amounts of capital, disrupting highly optimized supply chains, all to mitigate risks that haven't materialized on the balance sheet.
So how do you sell that? I mean, you can't just walk into a boardroom of financiers in 2006 and say, we need to save the environment because it's the right thing to do. They'd laugh you out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
A board's fiduciary duty is to shareholder returns, not philanthropy.
Exactly. Which means you have to fundamentally change the vocabulary, the pitch. She had to rebrand the very concept of sustainability.
Branded how?
She stripped away all the moralistic, philanthropic framing and presented it as a cold, hard survival mechanism.
Yeah.
This became her signature strategy, which she famously called performance with purpose.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that because, performance with purpose sounds like a generic corporate slogan you'd see on a motivational poster in a break room.
It really does.
But looking at the sources, it was actually ruthless risk management wearing a halo.
That is the perfect way to describe it. What's fascinating here is that performance with purpose was this grand unifying theory. It explicitly linked PepsiCo's financial performance directly to 3 pillars.
Which were?
Shifting the product portfolio toward healthier options, drastically cutting the company's environmental footprint, and building social responsibility into their operations.
But the genius was the underlying argument, right?
Yeah. She didn't frame ignoring water use as an ethical failing. She framed it as an existential business threat.
The license to operate argument.
Precisely. PepsiCo's operations are incredibly water-intensive. You need massive amounts of water to grow potatoes for Frito-Lay and millions of gallons of municipal water to bottle soda.
Right.
Nooyi looked at the projections for global water scarcity, especially in emerging markets like India. She argued to the board that if PepsiCo kept extracting local water tables dry while generating plastic waste, eventually local governments would literally lock them out of the factories.
They'd just revoke PepsiCo's license to operate.
Yes. It wasn't about saving the whales. It was about ensuring they legally had a business in 2020.
That makes the theoretical argument super clear. But I want to talk about the physical reality of this. We aren't just talking about changing a marketing campaign or putting a green leaf on a logo.
No, not at all.
How do you actually rewire a colossal global supply chain that is perfectly optimized to pump out cheap carbonated sugar water?
It is a logistical nightmare. It requires changing the fundamental metrics of success at every single level of the company. She couldn't just issue a memo.
So what did she actually do?
She restructured the top leadership team and the internal compensation dashboards. If you wanted a bonus as a PepsiCo executive, your division couldn't just hit its revenue targets anymore.
Oh, wow. They tied the bonuses to it.
Exactly. You had to demonstrate a measurable reduction in water and energy usage per unit of production. They had to invent new agricultural technologies to help potato farmers use less water. They engineered bottling plants with reverse osmosis systems to recycle wastewater.
She also aggressively changed what they were selling too. She led massive diversification efforts, bringing in and elevating brands like Tropicana, Quaker Oats, Sabra Hummus, Naked Juice.
Systematically steering the identity away from the soft drink aisle.
Right. And the execution, over a decade, was staggering. By 2017, healthier products actually made up the majority of PepsiCo's reported portfolio.
Which brings up a fascinating tension in how we evaluate her legacy today. Because looking at this through a modern lens, performance with purpose looks exactly like the blueprint for the ESG movement, environmental, social, and governance.
She basically anticipated the pressures that forced almost every other Fortune 500 company to scramble a decade later. I do have to ask, though, so was this basically ESG before ESG had a name? Or was it just incredibly sharp, long-range business planning that happened to have a socially conscious label slapped on it?
What's fascinating here is that you can fiercely defend both interpretations. A pure business strategist would argue that this had absolutely nothing to do with saving the world and everything to do with saving PepsiCo's margins.
Because the sugary beverage business had an expiration date.
Exactly. Consumer habits were shifting. By acquiring Quaker Oats and pivoting to hummus and baked chips, she was just moving capital into growth markets. And the environmental initiatives, purely hedging against future carbon taxes and water scarcity shutdowns.
It's ruthless capitalism that just so happens to result in slightly more efficient water use. I honestly love that duality. It doesn't really matter if you're doing it for your soul or your spreadsheet, as long as the structural outcome is a more resilient company.
Very true.
But here is where the temporal dissonance from the Minds in Motion framework really kicks in. No matter how brilliantly performance with purpose was shifting the foundations, Wall Street does not care about the foundation. Wall Street cares about the paint job, and they demand it be repainted every 90 days.
The clash of timelines. Performance with purpose was operating on a generational clock, while Wall Street operates on a quarterly clock. And those two timelines were about to violently collide.
July 2013. We are 7 years into Indra Nooyi's tenure. The portfolio shift is deep underway, the massive ship is slowly turning, and then Nelson Peltz steps out of the shadows.
The activist investor.
Yep. He runs Trian Fund Management, and he reveals that Trian has quietly built a massive stake in PepsiCo, over $1.3 billion.
We really need to break down the actual mechanics of activist investing here because the terminology can be confusing. A $1.3 billion stake sounds astronomical, and it is.
Huge amount of money.
But in a company the size of PepsiCo, whose market cap was well over $100 billion at the time, Peltz's stake was actually only a fractional percentage, around 1%.
Wait, if he only owns 1% of the company, he can't just change the locks on the building. He doesn't have the legal authority to walk into the boardroom and fire people. So how does a 1% stake give him the power to demand they split in two?
It's not about the voting power of that 1%. It's about the megaphone it provides and the threat it represents.
Okay, explain that.
Activist investors like Peltz are incredibly skilled at identifying vulnerabilities in a company's narrative. When an investor with his track record takes a billion-dollar position, it sends a massive signal to the rest of Wall Street.
To the other big funds.
Right. It tells the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, the massive pension funds that Trian sees untapped value that the current CEO is suppressing.
This feels less like a boardroom debate and more like a hostile home invasion. Imagine a very wealthy new roommate moving in, buying a third of your mortgage, and demanding you immediately divorce your spouse because they think you'd be more efficient single.
Honestly, that's a brilliant analogy. He doesn't need to own the house. He just needs to convince a majority of the other shareholders that his plan will make them richer faster than Nooyi's plan.
And if he convinces them, what happens?
He can launch a proxy fight. That's a hostile campaign where he attempts to gather enough shareholder votes to oust the current board of directors, replace them with his own hand-picked candidates, who will then force the CEO to execute a strategy.
And his strategy was incredibly aggressive. He didn't just want them to tweak the marketing budget. He demanded that PepsiCo acquire Mondelez International, the makers of Oreos and Ritz, and then violently spin off the combined behemoth into two completely separate companies.
One for beverages, one for snacks.
Exactly. But I don't quite get the Wall Street math here. If Pepsi's beverage division and Frito-Lay snack division are making a combined profit of, say, $10 billion under one roof, why does splitting them magically create more value?
It comes down to something called the conglomerate discount and the concept of a pure play premium.
Okay, what does that mean?
Wall Street analysts hate complexity. When a company does two different things, like sell soda and sell oatmeal, investors often value the combined company less than the sum of its parts.
Wait, really? Why?
Because they look at PepsiCo and say, I love the snack business, I'd pay a premium for that stock, but I don't want to buy the sluggish beverage business. Peltz's argument was that the slow-moving beverage anchor was dragging down the valuation multiple of the fast-growing snacks division.
He's basically saying, cut the dead weight, give investors a pure snack stock, let it fly, and the total shareholder return will soar.
Exactly. And Nooyi, backed by her board, rejected this premise entirely. And they didn't just reject it once, they rejected it repeatedly for over a year.
Their defense was that keeping beverages and snacks integrated provided crucial scale, right?
Yes, irreplaceable scale and negotiating leverage. Think about a major grocery store chain like Walmart or Kroger.
Shelf space is everything.
Right, it's the most valuable real estate in retail. If PepsiCo walks into a negotiation as a combined entity, they can say, if you want the newest flavor of Doritos, you also need to give us premium displays for our new sparkling water line.
The snacks business provides the muscle to push the newer, healthier beverages into the market.
Exactly. Plus, they share logistics, trucking routes, back ends. Nooyi argued that splitting the company would destroy those synergies and create two smaller, less resilient entities.
But Peltz didn't care about grocery store logistics in 2020. He cared about the stock price in 2014. And the escalation here is what's truly wild.
Oh, it got very ugly.
Yeah, he didn't just send a polite letter, receive a no thank you, and go away. He went to war. He published an exhaustive 37-page white paper detailing exactly why Nooyi's strategy was failing.
He went on financial television networks to publicly criticize her. He actively courted the large institutional investors.
The psychological pressure on Indra Nooyi during this period had to be almost unimaginable. You have a board of directors who are legally obligated to maximize shareholder value, and a well-connected billionaire publicly campaigning every single day that your life's work is actively destroying that value.
Every single quarterly earnings call became a battlefield. Every decimal point of margin compression was scrutinized as proof that she was incompetent.
And there was absolutely no guarantee she was going to survive this. If Peltz convinced just a few major pension funds that Nooyi was being stubborn, she would have been fired.
It's wild to think about the alternate history. What if Peltz had won? What if PepsiCo had split in 2014?
If we extrapolate that timeline out, a standalone Pepsi beverage company, totally stripped of the cash flow of the snack division, would have been incredibly vulnerable entering the late 2010s.
Right when the backlash against sugary drinks hit its peak.
Exactly. That standalone company might not have had the capital required to aggressively innovate into healthier spaces, like acquiring SodaStream. Nooyi's argument was that the profitable snacks division needed to subsidize the beverage division's transition.
And this is where our deep dive has to remain totally objective. We can't just paint Nooyi as the flawless visionary and Peltz as the greedy villain.
Right. The sources make it clear that the long game has a brutal cost.
Exactly. We have to be careful about romanticizing visionary leaders. Long-term strategies are incredibly expensive, they are chaotic, and sometimes the short-term critics are absolutely right about the immediate math.
Let's talk about the bottling acquisition, because this seems like the move that gave Peltz his opening. In 2010, Nooyi made a massive, multi-billion-dollar move to acquire PepsiCo's two largest North American bottlers.
Which was a huge shift. Up until then, Pepsi operated mostly on a franchise model. They made the concentrated syrup and sold it to independent bottling companies who actually mixed it, put it in plastic, and drove it to the stores.
And that franchise model had been the industry standard for decades. It's capital efficient because you don't own the trucks or the glass factories.
You're an asset-light intellectual property company.
So if she is trying to modernize the company for a sleek, ESG-focused future, why on earth did she suddenly spend nearly $8 billion buying up heavy 20th century industrial bottling plants? That sounds completely backwards.
Well, because the decentralized bottling system was breaking down in the modern retail environment. The major retailers, the big box stores, they didn't want to deal with 50 different regional bottling franchises with different pricing structures.
They wanted a single point of contact with Pepsi corporate.
Right. And furthermore, Nooyi realized she couldn't execute performance with purpose if she didn't control the means of production. You can't mandate a 20% reduction in water usage if you don't actually own the factory using the water.
That makes sense. She believed the bottling system was misaligned with her visions, so she bought them out.
But the immediate cost was staggering. She essentially absorbed massive amounts of low-margin, capital-intensive infrastructure onto her balance sheet, and it dragged down the company's financials for years.
Which brings us to the uncomfortable truth backing Nelson Peltz's attack. Under Nooyi's tenure, during this specific stretch, roughly 2008 to 2013, PepsiCo's total shareholder return had legitimately lagged behind its arch-rival, Coca-Cola.
Because Coke had taken the exact opposite approach. They were aggressively shedding their bottling assets, becoming leaner, returning cash to shareholders.
So Peltz wasn't making up his numbers. He looked at the scoreboard, pointed at Coke, and said, "They are beating you on margin, your bottling integration is a mess, and my spin-off plan will fix it."
Which forces a really difficult question.
Right. So what does this all mean? If Coca-Cola was beating them on shareholder returns, didn't Peltz have a point? Are we just giving Nooyi a pass because we like her long-term vision, even if the short-term execution was bleeding cash?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that tension is exactly why this case study is so vital. It reveals the fundamental difference between an ideologue and a true visionary.
What's the difference?
An ideologue ignores the data because they are completely obsessed with their grand vision. They'll drive the company off a cliff while insisting they are right.
And a visionary.
A visionary looks at the data, acknowledges the immediate pain, admits the execution flaws, but maintains the conviction that the long-term horizon will yield a superior, more sustainable result. Nooyi treated the criticism as something to answer with evidence, not something to blindly cave to.
But she couldn't just sit there and say, "Trust me, it'll work in 2020. She was bleeding institutional support.
Yeah.
So how did she survive the siege?
She made a brilliant tactical compromise. She drew a hard line in the sand on a strategy. She absolutely refused to yield her position on the portfolio shift or the split. But to pacify the market, she committed to a massive capital allocation shift. She promised to return significantly more cash to shareholders through aggressive stock dividends and massive share buybacks.
She threw Wall Street a bone.
A multi-billion-dollar bone. By initiating buybacks, she essentially rented the patience of the institutional investors.
I love that phrase, renting patience. It reminds me of the pressure we face in our own careers. It's like when you're studying for a massive certification exam at night. It's a long-term play. But your boss is furious because you aren't doing the daily grunt work as fast.
Right, the short-term pressure.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to stay late one night and aggressively clear your entire inbox doing the menial tasks, purely to buy yourself the political capital to be left alone so you can keep studying. That's essentially what a stock buyback is here.
It is the exact same mechanism, just scaled up to billions of dollars. She gave the massive pension funds enough short-term financial sugar to keep their quarterly returns looking healthy. That bought her the time she desperately needed.
It's an incredible balancing act of ego and pragmatism. But how does a leader know when they are holding the line for a brilliant future versus just refusing to admit a multi-billion-dollar mistake? Because there is a razor-thin line between being a steadfast visionary and just being stubbornly delusional.
That might be the hardest question in all of leadership. And the only way to differentiate between the two is a relentless, objective assessment of the underlying evidence.
She didn't just trust her gut.
No. She trusted the demographic data, the environmental modeling, the shifting consumer patterns. She let the data dictate the strategy, but she manipulated the financial levers to buy the time necessary for that data to materialize.
And eventually, history had to cast a verdict. The standoff couldn't last forever. Trian Fund Management realized they were not going to win a proxy fight. She had secured enough loyalty from the major shareholders through her compromises.
So in 2016, Peltz quietly sold off his stake and moved on.
And Nooyi held her strategy steady. She didn't just survive, she fundamentally reshaped the architecture of the company.
When she finally stepped down in 2018, her read on the market had been highly validated. Consumer preferences had aggressively shifted toward health and sustainability.
The brands she acquired were driving the growth.
Exactly. And the water and carbon reductions had made the supply chain more resilient. The long game won.
The data finally caught up to the vision.
And it is worth pausing to consider the sheer rarity of that outcome. It is exceedingly rare for a CEO to survive that kind of well-funded public activist pressure without being forced to break up their company.
Especially in the modern era. If 2013 was tough, imagine trying to do this today with algorithmic trading and hyper-fast news cycles. It really makes you wonder if it is even possible for a CEO today to execute a 10-year plan without being ousted at the first sign of a stock dip.
It is exponentially harder now. And that's exactly why applying the Minds in Motion framework to this case study is so vital for anyone listening. The researchers draw a brilliant parallel here.
Right, this maps directly onto the struggles of scientists and researchers defending multi-year projects.
Exactly. Think about a scientist defending a complex research direction. They have a hypothesis built on solid preliminary data, but it's going to take years of meticulous clinical trials to prove.
But the environment around them, the peer reviewers, the grant committees, they all demand faster, safer, immediately legible results.
They want the academic equivalent of a quarterly earnings bump, the classic publish or perish dilemma. If you don't publish a small finding every 6 months, you lose your funding, even if you're on the verge of a breakthrough.
The system punishes the long game. And the lesson from Indra Nooyi for those researchers is that true conviction doesn't mean ignoring your critics. It means genuinely engaging the strongest counter-arguments, adapting where necessary, like the buybacks, and surviving long enough to out-evidence your critics over time.
It's a masterclass in resilience.
It's like planting an oak tree. Everyone's yelling at you because it isn't yielding fruit in 3 months. But you have to have the quiet confidence to know you aren't planting a strawberry bush.
That's a perfect summary.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Indra Nooyi, PepsiCo, and the fierce discipline required for long-term value creation. If you are currently defending a slow strategy or a multi-year personal goal against impatient critics, send this deep dive to someone fighting that same fight.
It helps to know you aren't the only one getting yelled at for planting an oak tree.
It really does. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We've talked about activist billionaires demanding instant results in the boardroom. But what about the activist investors in our own lives?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Whether it's a social media algorithm demanding your attention for a dopamine hit, a boss who only cares about this week's deliverables, or our own internal anxiety screaming at us to just take the easy win. What long-term vision in your own life are you sacrificing right now just to satisfy the pressure for a short-term win? Stay curious, hold the line, and be sure to subscribe for our next deep dive.